Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're on Masechtas Chulin, daf Nun Vav. We are going to begin on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, the top by the Mishnah. Ve'elu trefus b'of. These are the examples of where a bird will be non-kosher. So we began on Mem Daled talking about il trefus of a behema. 10 blot later, Nun Daled, we talk about where it's kosher. So now, a little bit truncated, we talk about birds on Nun Vav. So what are some of the examples? Nekivus haveshet. If there's a hole in the esophagus, pusekes hagargeras, or if the windpipe, the trachea, is severed. Now this Rashi says, Aval pishakol trefus the behema kenegdim ba'oif. We already know that obviously there's a lot of halachic differences with the shechita between an oaf and a behema, but nonetheless, when it comes to the dinim of trefus, they're basically the same. So then, why do we need to mention these? So how does strichule? We're missing the kivus of veshet. Why do we need to mention about a hole in the veshet? Mishum psekas gargeras, to tell you when it comes to the windpipe. V'u'isricha itzrich d'otei hoyel b'chiyusu shel well, nafish, it's easier to kill a bird than an animal because all you need to do is cut one of the simanim and that's going to die, as opposed to an animal which you need 2 simanim. So aim a gargeris nami titar b'mashahu. You would think maybe even with a mashahu is going to make it a treifa. So chiddush is that that's not the din when it comes to the trachea. It's the din of just like a behema, that it's a roiv. And over here we have a picture, as you could see over here, of a kana as well as the veshet of a bird. So this is just one of a few diagrams that we are going to be looking at today. And I believe this idea is echoed over here. Let me just read it. There's only a few paragraphs. So it says that they are identical. Again, there are some variations between a bird and an animal in the physical makeup of the tubes. For example, the outer layer of the esophagus of birds is white, not red. So an animal's esophagus is red, but a bird's is white. The tabois, the rings of the cartilage of the bird's trachea, are a complete circle, unlike the horseshoe-shaped rings of an animal. As we discussed, do you have to do the shechita and the tabas gedola, or all the other tabois, or maybe between the rings, because those rings only go up a little bit, but not the entirety. So that's another interesting distinction when it comes to birds, that when it comes to their tabois, their rings of cartilage are completely around. It says in parentheses, Rashi on Daf Chav Ches indicates that the outer layer of the esophagus of a bird is red. This is not the case today in our domesticated fowl. Actually, the reason that the esophagus is red in animals is because it is comprised of muscle. Our fowl have mostly white meat, so it follows that the esophagus is white as well. Apparently, this was not so in earlier times. So animal meat is reddish, and we know chicken, right? There's dark and white meat. So that's the idea. It makes more sense why the simanim are white on a bird. Okay, so that's the first little piece, and then the Mishnah continues. Hikta chulda al roishai. Let's say you have a weasel that bit into the head of the bird. Makam sheisa as a treifa, in a place in which it would become a treifa. So that's a concern. Rashi says chashinan when the cave is krum. We're concerned that it may make a hole in the membrane of the brain. So therefore, we're going to have to we'll see how you could be boidik that part of the bird to demonstrate whether or not it's a treif or not. Gemara is going to have a few potential explanations for that. Nikav hakorkavan. Let's say the gizzard has a hole in it. or nikvu hadakin, the intestines has a hole. So in that situation, let's just finish this part. Nafal, or let's say the bird fell into a fire, v'nechmaru b'nei me'eha, and its innards got shriveled up. So it depends. Im yarukin psulim, if the color changes to green, it's puzzle. Im adumim ksher, if they're red, then it is kosher. So these are all cases in which it will be a treifa. There's a hole in the gizzard, in the intestines. So let's just take a look at what the korkavan is. So you can see toward the bottom in this picture, this example of the korkavan, which is right over here, the gizzard. Also, with regard to the dakin, which is the small intestines. So if there's a hole here as well in the bird, that's also going to be problematic. Let's just see what it says over here. Small intestines of a chicken. This pimple-like structure located in the dakin, the small intestine, at times becomes infected and swollen, which often results in a neck of a puncture. This is one of the treifas that are routinely checked for an American poultry plants. So again, you could see a little bit of this pus, if you will, or how we find on the dock in the intestines, there's some inflammation in this part, which is called the Meckel's diverticulum. So that particular section of the dakin is a particular area where there could potentially become problems due to infection and it becoming swollen, ultimately popping and becoming a puncture. So those are reasons to be concerned. Okay. All right. So with that said, let's keep on going. So the Mishnah then says the following: Darsa v'tarfa b'kaisel. Let's say you have this animal. Actually, let's look at Rashi before we go too far. So im adumim, what it says if it's red, haleva korkavan kimishpatan shulishtanu mar shalahen. So if you examine them and it's red, specifically referring to the heart and the korkavan, the gizzard, which it's normally that color, so then it's going to be okay. So this is another picture of how the parts of it are green. So you can just take a quick look at this. Adumim b'lever korkavan, and it also says kaved, also by the liver. So there is this that natural color, as we can see in this particular example. Okay, so now darso v'tarfa b'kaisel, says Rashi. Let's say a person tramples on it with his foot and psulim im adumim ksherim. So v'tarfa b'kaisel o shiritza behema mafracheses, or says Rashi, it gets hit by a wall, or says Rashi, de'ikol mechash lahani tlasa mishum risuk ivarim. These are all issues that if an animal shakes it around, so therefore it can cause risuk ivarim, like we discussed before, that if the animal may fall down from a far place, a high place, and lands on the ground, so it could shake the very innards, so they're dislocated, which becomes a treifa. So v'shahas me'esel esel shachtak shera. So what we can do in the case of a chashash of risuk ivarim is we wait for a period of 24 hours, and if nothing happens, or the Gemara elsewhere talked about if it could stand on its own, if it could walk on its own, then we wait 24 hours, then it's kosher. Okay, so that is the Mishnah, and that is mostly what we're going to see here in the pictures. Let me just see if there's one more discussion here. So when we talked about the dakin, there's a hole in the intestines. It says birds have a curly small intestine, but they don't have this winding colon like animals do. In the majority of domestic birds, 60% chickens, 80% ducks, 90% geese, there's a small structure on the curly small intestine known as the Meckel's diversatulum, which we mentioned before. It resembles a small bump or pimple. It is not uncommon to find this structure swollen and infected, which raises the possibility that it may become pierced. So that's the reason why we saw that picture, that it could potentially be a problem, because a lot of these animals do develop this particular blister, if you will, on this particular part of the animal, on the intestine, and therefore because of that, that is actually examined by American poultry plants to ensure that that's there's no hole there. Okay, Ram Shmuel believed the Amri machnas yod lifnim b'boidik. So now we're going to go back to, you have this weasel that did some serious damage. It bit into the head of this bird, and we're concerned that there may be this issue that something happened to its brain that was punctured, and that's going to be a big problem. So what do? Machnas yod lifnim, we put our fingers, our hands, into the mouth of the bird, uboidik, and we do an examination. It says Rashi bepiv shel oif, into its mouth, where it was bit by the chulda, uboidik doichek etzba'oi klapi chaych ha'oif, v'moach nichach l'mal. So we basically will put our fingers in there as part of the examination. So what are we looking for? Says the Gemara, im bevatz feitz v'oila, if it bubbles up or pops up, namely treifa. In other words, if the brain matter comes out, there is definitely going to be a hole in the brain. The imlav kshera. So we understand that this brain matter, as we put our fingers in there, that will determine that there's probably a hole in the membrane. So that makes sense according to the sheet which we saw previously in Daf Mem Hey, that if there's a hole in the membrane, there's actually two membranes. There's the inner and the outer one. So the question is it just one of the layers of the membrane? So he said that one sheet holds that it's until there's a hole in the lower one, literally. Elman Yemer Inkiv Ilah, the top one, Afgav Dolo Inkiv Tata. So it's still a treifa. Nechesh Dilma Ilah Inkiv Tatalo Inkiv. In other words, there is this argument regarding this idea, and therefore, how do you know necessarily that it's a treifa? Because if only one of them is punctured, but the other one's not, it's going to prevent the brain matter from coming out, and nonetheless, so you'll end up saying, oh, okay, therefore it's kosher, but maybe it's not, because according to the sheet, that still makes it a treifa. So Isa, the income ilah, the truth is no. If it would be that the upper membrane was punctured, tata agav rucha mifka poka, because it's so soft, it will end up basically coming out, right? It would still be basically punctured. Says Rashi, b'dechifas etzba, by you putting your finger in there, even if there's only one membrane that was severed or there's a hole in it, it's going to end up causing the other one to ooze out. So the truth is, if it doesn't ooze out, then that's probably proof that neither of the membrane, the upper, the bottom, if you will, the ilah, the tata, none of them were compromised, and that's the reason why it's kosher. However, if you do this badika, even though it's true, maybe only one of the two membranes was cut or it was a hole in it, but it will cause the brain matter to be oozed out, and you'll make it a treifa anyway. So it's not going to be an issue. Actually, he says you can't do anything. Their teeth are very small, and it's very difficult for you to be able to determine if there's actually a hole there. So even if there is actually a hole by this weasel, sometimes the brain matter is not going to come out through these very, very small holes. But still, it will be a mashahu, a small enough of a hole to make into a treifa. So therefore, if we know that Hulda bit it, that's it. We're not going to take any more chances. V'chi shineha dakos my hobby. 1 second. But if the teeth are so small, it's impossible to say that some of it won't ooze out. So it's not just that they are very small, but they're also crooked. They're like in a diagonal form. Says Rashi, "V'noikiv be'alkasoin." So because of that, it's not like one tooth hits another tooth straight, like a good dental work, right? And therefore it's going to puncture a hole this way, and it's going to make a significant hole because they're all crooked and jagged. So, and they're so small, it's not going to make as much of an impact, and therefore the brain matter will not come out when it comes to this, and therefore we have to be chayshish that there really still is a hole there. The things that were said previously, namely that you should do this biyad, that's a mistake. Bar Mocham or Mishmei Rav Shimon ben Lakish Baidkin l'chulda biyad of loy b'masamer. So when he says that you should do the hand, but you should do it not with a nail. So what does it mean with a nail? So basically, what you have to do is remove the bone from and everything of the skull. You remove everything and drag a nail along the surface of the membrane to detect if there is a hole. So basically, use a nail. Says Rashi, "Milamalo moilichal nekev lido sim yachor bekrum upoisech as a golgolas," and you open up the skull la'achar shchita upamim she'enu noku. Sometimes there won't be a hole. The problem is, don't use a nail because maybe the nail will puncture it by the bedika will make the hole. Which is a very interesting line. The problem is it's a financial loss for no reason. You're going to do a bedika to see if there's a hole by using something which is so sharp, using a nail which has a sharp point, that in itself is what may produce the hole. So don't do that. You can actually use a nail to determine it, and we're not concerned that the nail will make it into a treifa. Some use the hand, some use the needle. So Manda Badaka Biyad used the hand, the one who didn't use the hand said, what are you doing? How can you use a nail? How could you use a needle? This sharp thing is going to end up puncturing it, and you're not going to know any different, and you're going to end up being mafsid mum Yisrael because it really wasn't a treifa. You made a hole into it, and now all of a sudden you think it's a treifa. No, you just made a hole into it. You can make a hole into meat after the shechita. It's still kosher. The problem is, was there a hole before the shechita? But you're not going to know that. You're going to think that the hole was there from before. So don't use a needle. Don't use a nail. Says this examination is insufficient. You should be using a nail. That's what's really going to be able to determine whether it's kosher or not. By you using your hand, that will not necessarily be a proper bedika. Nevelas v'hashchuti. What do you mean a nevela? If it's shechted, that's not a nevela. Elatrefas shemanika krum shalmayach. Maybe tak is a treifa because maybe there was a hole in the membrane of the brain. Testain Rabbi Huda badik biyada. He probably used his hand. The sign Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer. he said Mishum Rabbi Yehuda in his name that Boitkin L'chol de Biyad of a Lo Samer. It says pretty clearly they use the hand and not the nail. Okay, fine. Now Nishbar Ha'etzem, let's say a bone is broken, and the Gemara is going to ask on this soon. We're going to say it's a treifa. Now, afal bishul nikav krum shel mayach, even though there's no hole in the membrane. If there's a bone that's broken, so that's it. It's going to be problematic. So, testayim, so then itself is some type of a proof. So, what was the proof? Again, that we find that Rabbi Yehuda is the one who says that it has to be your buttock biyad, which says it pretty explicitly. Now, hagufa kasha. This sounds like a contradiction. Amrit, first of all, you said boitkin l'chol biyad avol masamri. You told me you can use the hand. Isle badikusa. There is a way of doing badika. There's an option of figuring it out by examining. V'hadar tani nishbar etzem. Then you mentioned about the broken bone. Afal bi shlon nikav krum shel mayach. Even if there's not a hole in the membrane. Alma leisle badikusa. You can't really do a badika because if you break open the skull, so then it's possible, then that's going to be like a potential issue of treifa, so you can't do the badika. So seifa tain lo'oiv shel mayim hoyel ve'ein lo krum. So we're talking about a bird on the water, a bird that lives by the water, which has no membrane protecting its brain. Pretty crazy, right? So this is an unusual type of an animal that has nothing. So ain't no krum, something like that. What do you mean? How there's no casing for the brain of a ov shel mayim? No, el hoyel v'krumo rach. Its membrane is soft. Hilchach says Rashi kinishbar etzem su loy koi karum. That because it's so soft, if the etzem breaks, then there's no membrane. In other words, once you crack open, so then it's going to already damage the membrane, and therefore you're not going to be able to examine it. So this is something specific when it comes to an oif shel mayim. Amrulei Rav Nachman Rav Anan Mara Mishmul Badik Biyado Machsher. He actually used his hand, and he said it was kosher. V'huna Chavrin Oimer, and Huna and his friends said that Rab Badik Biyada, he used his hand, Machsher. The Tani Levi Trefus Shemana Chachamim Bebehema Keneged Ba'ov. We know that when it comes to the dinim of treifa, for an animal, as we said before, it's basically the same thing for a bird. Yes, olehin of nishbar etzem. However, when it comes to a bird, the broken bones is another issue. Because so we see clearly that any type of bird that you can't do a badika. So I'm really no. Hahu ba'oif shel mayim however ein lo krum. Ein lo krum sagadat has no membrane. El hoyev krumoi rach, because again it is soft. Hahi tarnagoyla dahavi beirav. So Chana, there was this bird. Shadakamid Rav Masna was sent to him. Nishbar etzem, the bone was broken. V'nikav krum shel mayach hu v'akshri. So we see unbelievable that you could break the bone and it's not going to necessarily do damage keneged that krum. Or maleva tani levi trefa shemon chachamim bebehema keneged oif. Yasalahin oif, that the birds are a little bit more, that nishbar etzem al pimishal nikav krum shel mayach. Nonetheless, it's going to be a problem. So amalei hasam ba'oif shel mayim. Over there, we're talking about a bird by the water. Hoyav ein lo krum. Ein lo krum sagadaitach el ema hoyav krumo rach. That it's soft. Okay, so let's slow down. Let's look at question 5. So when it comes to a bird by the water, nishbar etzem, if the bone is broken in the head, even though there's no hole in the krum shel mayach, it's treifa because the krum is so soft, it probably also did damage there as well. So that is an issue specifically when it comes to that type of bird, which is question TB 27. Be'eza bali chayim hu treifa b'nishbar etzem al fabi shel nikav krum shel mayach or of shel mayim, which is of course the correct answer. Beautiful, and that is TB 27. 7. Okay. All right. Let's keep on moving. So Rav Shizbi Badik B'Shimsha. Interesting. Similar, as we're going to see, to being Badik a knife with the sun, with water. We have similar, where Badik the animal, the bird by the sun, says Rashi, Keneged HaShemesh, Mistakel Imira Nekef, you can see if there's a hole there by the sun. Rav Yemer Badik B'Maya, he would do this by the water, which we'll see on the next Amud in Rashi how he did that. Two answers. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov Badik, as we continue to Nun Vav Amud Beis, that he would examine the bird in this part, Begila Dechita, with a straw from wheat. Rav Shizbi Hani Avzi Didan Ka'if Shalmayim Damyan. Our geese are comparable to a oif shel mayim, which again, because if there's nishber etzem of the moyach, even the krum has not been damaged, it's still a treifa. So let's look at Rashi. How did he examine with water? So two opinions. Either moitzi kol moyach min krum derech pia, that he would take out the brain from the membrane through derech pia, through its mouth, through the animal's mouth, kamoshi hi yoredes l'chut hashedra, umali hakrumayim, and then he would put in that membrane, he would fill it up with water, and if there was a hole, derech hamake, there's a hole in the krum that makes it treifa. So basically, they would take everything out of the brain, out of the head, outside of the krum. They would fill it up with water, and then if there was a leak, then obviously it means there was a hole in the krum shel mayach. Lashon Acha, Rashi says, Machnis b'nekev etzem mayim, that he would pour water into the skull. Then umoitzia, and he would take the water out. If let's say the water has a white color to it, then it got mixed with brain matter, and therefore it's problematic. Okay. Fine. And the straw from wheat, Rashi says that's comparable to a nail. Why are geese considered to be of shalmayim? Rashi says because they're always by the water. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Naful or. So we said that if the bird fell into a fire, and it shrivels up the innards, so what we do is we want to see its color. If it turned green, that's a problem. If it stays red, then that's okay. That's good. So Rav Yochanan Yishem Rav Yosi ben Yeshua, Shir Yerukan, the measurement of green is Kashir Nekuvatan, like a hole. So the discoloration, the change to green, is the same as a hole. So just like a hole, even if it's a mashahu, it's going to make into a treifa. So too, if there's discoloration to green, that will also make it a treifa. So Bamini Rav Yosef Berei, Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Harika kaved. Let's say you find that the liver turns green, keneged b'nemoyim, opposite the stomach, the innards, mahu. So says Rashi, Roisha echad shel kaved, one end of the liver is totally keneged b'nemoyim, is opposite the stomach. Roisha echad umal, and the other one is up. So, Amrulei treifa. So why should it be any different than if the kaved was taken out? We know if the liver was completely taken out, it's still kosher. So then why would we say that this is a treifa just because of this? So Marabba Kivan Shaharika kaved, once there's green discoloration of the liver, Kenegam Mayim, Biadu Shanaful or, it's clear that it went into fire. The Nechmaru B'nei Mayim B'charfa, and the B'nei Mayim got shriveled up, and therefore it's treifa. As we said, sometimes taking out is less of a problem than a disease on that organ, because that demonstrates maybe it could have spread to other parts of the body, etc. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so he had this bird, Shadril Kamed Rebbe Lazar, Hakafar Baribi. He sent it to him, which is Baribi means he was the gadol in the generation. He was a great guy, big Talmud Chacham. are Malay Yerukin Havi. So he said that these intestines, the dakin, are green, therefore it's a treifa. But then he says va'achshrei, and he says, okay, it's kosher. What do you mean? What do you mean? If you told me that they're green, why would that be a reason to say it's kosher? Should make it treifa. Lo Amr Yerukim Chulin El Bekorkovan Belev Uvekaved. As we said before, it depends on what organ we're talking about. If we're talking about the korkovan, the heart or the liver, in which they naturally are red, so then if there's green there, that's when it becomes problematic. However, we're dealing with the dakin, the intestines, as I showed you in a picture, those are naturally green. So therefore, if you find that in the dakin, the small intestines, there's green, and you could see a little bit of how it's green in this picture, that doesn't mean that it's a treifa. That's the natural way of the dakin, that there is green. Not maybe not the entire intestine, but parts of it. That's the natural color, and therefore the fact that it was green, that is the reason to say it's kosher. So again, you can't compare one organ to the next. Some organs have different colors, different shapes, different functions. So therefore, because of that, the fact that it was green doesn't mean that's a problem. In fact, that's probably normal. If you took Bar Yosef, Havili Hahu Tarnagoyel, there was this bird. Shadaka Rav Avoyim, Ramalei Adumin Havi Betarfa. He said, oh my goodness, it's red, it's treif. What? What do you mean it's red, it's treif? When on Tanan, Adumin Sharon, our Mishnah said if it's red, it's kosher. So it's the same thing. But now we have to look at the other way around. Normally, Adumin Shaharikoi Veyarukin Shadimu Treifa. If it's normally red and it turned green, for example, the korkovan, the gizzard, the heart, the kaveh, the liver, then that's a problem. On the other hand, if it's supposed to be green, like the intestines, the dakin, and they were red, that's treifa. Lo amar adumim ksherin el b'lei b'korkovan v'kaved. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Achia amar Rav Mani. Adumin shaharikan, if they're supposed to be naturally red, like the heart, for example, and they turn green, b'sholkan, then you cook it up. The chazir v'hadimu, then all of a sudden it goes back to its original color, ksherin. My taima, why? What do you mean? It was green, so now, but it went back to red. So what is it? Is it red or green? Why are we saying it's red? The fact that you cooked it demonstrated that kutra ayil bahu, that it was the smoke is what caused it to temporarily make it green. But the truth is, it really didn't do damage to it, and therefore, because of that, it's now fine. Says Rashi, Mikara, it was from the smoke. It went back from it being green to going back to being red. So now it went back to its original status through the hot water, made it go back to its original natural state, which is its redness, which is kosher. When we talked about the gizzard, which is supposed to be red, shlu harikun, it shouldn't turn green. However, shakun b'hariku treifa. If, let's say, it turned green, then it's a treifa. So my taima, so gali b'hiyusai. So even though you look at the gizzard and it's red, which is what it's supposed to be, but by cooking it, it turns green, that demonstrates really there was damage to it, and the truth is that revealed that it was actually damaged by the burning. Ravashi Hilchach, therefore, lo leichel inish ella b'shkol. A person needs to really boil a bird to be able to do a proper bedika to see what color will it be at the end, and then you could do a bedika afterwards. He went out to do all that because we don't have to assume that the gizzard was burned, and therefore we're not going to have to go through this whole process. We will just assume that everything is fine. Okay, let's get to the Mishnah, then we'll look at question TA24. Doris of Atarfa B'Kaisel, Rabbi Elazar ben Antigonus, he said, Mishum, in the name of Rabbi Elazar of Rabbi Yanai, Achazu v'Achazu, Sricha B'Dika, he says that you always need to do B'Dika because we're concerned of Risuk Ivar. Okay, TA 24. Al Ez Oif, on what type of a bird did Rav Ashi say the lo nechol el b'shalika, that you need to cook up with hot water? Now, it doesn't really mean, even in the Havamina, it doesn't mean every bird, but rather an oif that was nuffle or. You have a bird that fell into fire, the shemis bar alidei shalika. Once you do the cooking, you'll be able to determine whether or not the kurkva and the heart and the kaved, whether or not they are indeed naturally red or they're staying green. So it doesn't mean that actually that every bird always you have to do this badika, but one which fell into fire, and it says just because it fell into fire, we don't necessarily even have to assume that that's what happened, because there's no reason to say a reisa, to put a reisa on a bird when there's no logical reason to assume that there's something wrong with it. Let's see the next Mishnah. Ve'elu ksheris ba'oif. So we talked about el trefus ba'of, now el ksheris ba'of. Again, when it came to a behem, those 10 blot apart. Here it's all in the same daf. Nikva hagargeres, oceanistica. So as we mentioned, when it came to the gargeres, the windpipe, it's only if it's severed beruboi, the majority. But if there's just a hole there, then that's not going to be a problem. Or if it was split. Ikasa chulda al roisha. Again, the case of the weasel that bit into its head. However, makam she'eno isa treifa. However, it's not a place where it can become a treifa. We know for sure it didn't penetrate into the membrane of the brain. Nikav hazefek. If the crope, the part of the animal which stores its food, had a hole in it. Rabbi Omer feel nital. Even if the zefek, even if the crope was completely taken out. We've got to have a picture of that, right? So let's find that here. So we can see that this is, you can see where this is in proximity to the kana and the veshet, right? We see the windpipe and the esophagus, and then you can see over here, basically right below it, is the crope, in which is the zefek. So it says over here, the zefek had been inflated with air for demonstrative purposes, is normally filled with food, right? But they just decided to blow it up a little bit for us so we could have a better visual of what we're talking about over here. So apparently, even if it's completely removed, it's also not going to be a problem. Yatsu b'nei me'eha, let's say its innards come out, there's no hole, or nishmaru gapeha, or let's say there's a wing that is broken, namely the bone of the wing. Nishmaru ragleha, or its foot is broken. Rashi says min harkuvo mata, from below, possibly even above it. Rashi says Rashi. Nimratu kanfeha. Let's say that the feathers were plucked. Says Rashi, Hainu noitzi gedoyla shal kol gufa. These big feathers on the entire body. Noitze hi hadaka smuchel basar shein lokanim. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer im natal hanoitze psula. If you remove the noitze, which are the down feathers, then it will become pasul. All right, we're not going to get to that today, but at least we went through that part. We're going to see a little bit of this Mishnah, but before we go further, let's just take a quick look at one more paragraph about the zefek. The crope is a sac located at the base of the neck of a bird. Most species of birds have a crope, some don't. The esophagus leads into the crope, because obviously the animal swallows food into its esophagus, and then the food is stored in the zefek. From the crope, a tube leads to the kurkavan, to the gizzard, the muscular stomach of a bird. The function of a crope is to act as a temporary storage area for ingested food. The bird gobbles up large quantities of food quickly, and the food is deposited into the crope, which balloons out, as we saw in that picture, to accommodate the volume. A bulge at the base of the neck is often described in birds that have recently been fed. From the crope, the food is gradually passed on to the gizzard, where digestion takes place. So that's a little bit about the anatomy of a bird. It swallows, goes through the esophagus, it goes into this holding area known as the crope, and apparently that's obviously not as important as the gizzard, which is actually like the stomach, if you will, or the major digestive parting of the animal, including, of course, it has intestines, but that's the basic idea behind that. Turn about Masib Rav Simoy. So there's a story over here, as well as Rav Tzadik Sheholchu Aver Shana Belud. So they went, as they often do, to be able to calculate the year and to be able to figure out when all the Chagim are going to be. So it's a very important task. Shavsu b'oinai, and they rested, says Rashi, Yom Shabbos Shivtu Sham, so they rested on a particular Shabbos. V'hoyro betarvchas, and they paskin regarding the uterus, Kerebi bezefek, and they held like Rebbe regarding the zefek, regarding the crow. Okay, what was Rebbe? Rebbe said in the Mishnah that even if it was taken out, then it's also kosher. So Yiboyelu, Hayru betarfachas li'isura Kerebi bezefek l'hatera. Is it that they felt that when it came to the dinim of the uterus, which we don't really know what this is talking about so much, that it was aser, but the removal of the crope, like Rebbe, it was mater, like the Mishnah. Odilma hayre betar betarfachas latira Kerebi bezefek. Avol Kerebi bezefek lo sviru, but they don't hold like him teku. Okay, so let's look at Rashi. Tarti harois havi. There was two things that they paskin. Brought down Mestatis Sanhedrin, v'achilo Rebbe tarfin laklovim, that he fed them to dogs. Kerebi bezefek nam lahatira, they feel nitol even if it was taken out. Dilma hoyer betarfachas lahatira Kerebi bezefek v'amr shtiim nitol ha'im sheira kemastisen. If it was taken out, like the uterus is completely taken out, it's still kosher. Basically, the question is that if this part of the mother was taken out, is that animal a treifa or not? So Omer Rabbi B'Tem Rabbi Shubin Levi Gagoshon Zefek Nidin Kaveshet. The top part of the Zefek actually has the same din as the Veshet, even though we said we're pretty lenient when it comes to the crope, but the top of it is just like the Veshet itself, which we said if there's a small hole, it makes it a treifa. So hey, where is that? So Rabbi Barabaya Kol Shenim Tach Imoi. Basically where it narrows. So actually says Mamakam Shu Maskal Limshoich Litzad Haveshet Lios Meitzer V'Hoylech, as it becomes more and more narrow. So that is an interesting opinion, that at that point it becomes a problem. Okay, so let's just take a look over here. So this is a pretty big chiddush, that there is a chomer when it comes to the part of the zefek actually is a small hole will make into a treifa. So you can see that an example of the zefek, the crope, which is removed in this middle picture, and you can see the gagoy, the roof, if you will, the top of the crope, we will say has the same halachic status as the veshet, namely that even if there's a small hole, then that will make it into a treifa. Okay, that's going to be the last picture, I believe, of the day. So let's finish up this daf. Yatsu b'nei me'eha. So if the innards come out, that's only if you didn't invert them. Whereas when you put the intestines back in, they didn't get inverted. However, if they get inverted, so they're basically, if you put them back in, the whole thing gets topsy-turvy, then obviously there's something wrong. That who Hashem is one who fashioned everything in the proper way and created everything just so. Hashem made like these bases, a kanoi, as Rashi says, shabar lehem basis, like a base to sit on. V'im yardu nibsisim shuv in v'yashrim. If the base is removed, then the whole thing falls apart. Even if like one thing gets messed up, it affects everything else. Everything is perfectly contained in its way, and therefore, if anything would have been flipped over, then everything else the animal couldn't live. Tanya Meir Oimer, what does that mean? Which is taken from Hazino, I believe. Karcha de Kulabe Mimenu Kohanov, Mimenu Naviyav, Mimenu Sharab, Mimenu Malachav. In other words, we live in a village, Krach, says Rashi, Shakolba, everyone's there, B'chol Knesset Yisrael, Nemer, basically everyone is there, we all function and we rule and lead among each other, our Kohanim, our Nevi'im, kings, Shnemer Mimenu, from them, Pina is the cornerstone, Mimenu Yaseid, from them is the peg, V'gaimer. Hahu Arma, the Chazil who gathered, he saw a person in the Nuffel Me'igrul Ara. Tragically, he fell from a roof to the ground. Paki Kar Say, and his stomach burst. V'nafig Mane, and his stomach came out. Asya Lubre V'shachte Kamei. So he went to his son, says Rashi, Shel Zeha Neifel, to the one who fell. V'shachte Kamei. Says Rashi, he shechted in front of him, Nun Zayin Manal, be achuzas enayim. Says Rashi, so this was, he like basically pretended to kill him. V'lo he didn't touch him. V'lo hiziko, he didn't damage him. El demedamo aviv, it appeared ki'ilu nishchat, like he was shechted, lefi shul haya, roitz liga b'me'ayim, because he didn't want to reach the innards to not turn them inside out. So ingid v'isnach, he started to groan. Oil lemnei v'chite lekrase, and basically the innards went back in. So this is basically an unusual story. Basically, someone fell down, and what ended up happening was, even though it's true that all these innards came out, they were somehow able to be put back in, and he was able to survive, which of course is telling us, as we said, that if the animal is hefach, when the intestines were put back in, they were inverted, then they would become treifa. Let's just look at question 6. Nikava zefek mahadin. So normally you would say the crope, if there's a hole, it's not a problem. But if it's begago shel zefek, if it's on the top of the crope where it starts narrowing, it's treifa. But bashar, any other part, is kosher. Adkan.